Hello. My name's Thomas Hillman, and I'm speaking English for a reason. Not only because it's my mother tongue, but also because we're going to talk in this session about an international project, and I have several of my international colleagues with me that don't speak Swedish. The project we're going to be talking about is called RED, Reconfigurations of Educational Inequality in a Digital World. And it's a project we have that looks at the way that digitalization is taking place in different countries and schools and the effects it's having. So what we can say is that schooling is digitalized almost everywhere, but in very different ways. And there's a quote often attributed to William Gibson, who's a science fiction writer, but we don't really know if it's for sure. It's one of those quotes. But he said, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And that's sort of a starting point for this project. And so in the project, we have teams from here in Sweden, Germany, South Africa, Mexico, and Argentina. And we have representatives sort of, from all of those countries right here today. Federico is Argentinian, but works in Mexico at the moment, so he counts with both of those. This is the project members. There's 17 of us in the different countries. Several of us are here today. I won't go through all of it, but we're a happy group. And the questions we're looking at are twofold, really, to try to understand how policies and data infrastructures for digital education address inequality, and if they do, and how privileged and disadvantaged schools engage with digital technology and thus recreate or contest inequality. So what's the relationship between digitalization and inequality or equality in different school systems and between school systems? And so when we talk about inequalities, I thought I'd throw up a picture of a famous Swede. This is Göran Thurborn. A famous sociologist, and he's written a lot about inequality. And he talks about three different types of inequality. Vital inequality, which is, lifespan, quality of health, that kind of thing. Existential inequality, which is essentially freedom of action, what you're able to accomplish in your life. And resource inequality, which is access to and receipt of resources. And as you're going to see at this stage in our project, what we've been mostly looking at is resource inequality. So those of you that were in one of the workshops in the previous session have seen and tried this tool. It's a tool we've been making called InfoReveal, which allows us to visualize the data infrastructures at play when students and teachers use the digital equipment in their schools. And basically what it does is it visualizes how the data traffic travels to servers all over the world when we use things like a learning management system or even a regular website. And I know a bunch of you have tried it and we've gone into it in more detail. And just to kind of show a very simple example of resource inequality, these are the locations of data centers for the top 5 data center providers. Amazon, Microsoft, Alibaba, which is one of the 4 big Chinese internet companies, Google, and IBM. And what you'll notice if you look at those pictures is there's very few dots in Latin America or in Africa. So if we look at this map, you can see roughly, I did the sums, that it's roughly 29 data centers per billion above the line and 5 data centers per billion below the line. And that has a real effect because the further away you are from a data center, the slower everything is on the internet. The less fluid your experience is, the less fluidly you can do things on the internet. And what we'll see is that if you live in South Africa, most of the data centers you use are in Europe or in India. And you generally wait about 250 milliseconds for every tiny piece of data. Whereas we in Sweden, we talk to Frankfurt a lot or Dublin, places much nearer, and we generally wait 40 or 50 milliseconds. So it sounds like a little bit of time, but there are thousands and thousands and thousands of these data packets every hour we use the internet. So every experience is longer. And that's just a very simple resource equality, which is one of the things we've been looking at. But when you listen to these presentations, because we're going to give now, the important part is to realize that inequality is not just a thing between countries. There is lots of inequality within countries as well. And so like in the Swedish case, although we are amongst the most digitalized countries in the world, we can see that in 2019, Skolverket decided that 50% or they found that 50% of schools don't have sufficient network capacity to conduct the digital national exams. And what that was about was streaming video to a large extent. And so in their latest report in 2022, 30% of school principals said that they thought they had insufficient capacity to stream video for all the students in a class, in one class at a time. And that's the capacity you need to be able to do the video parts of the national exam, so those are connected. But we also see that in that 2022 survey with teachers, 10% of teachers say they're affected daily by unstable conditions on the internet. So even in a country like Sweden, which is one of the most connected countries in the world, we have different levels of resource. We have inequalities in those simple resources. But global and national differences in data infrastructure reveal certain inequalities, but it's really important to understand that educational inequalities play out locally. They don't play out in these grand national schemes. These grand national ideas have impact, but it's at a local scale that they play out. So what we're going to do today is go through some of our different countries that are involved in this, and people from those countries who are doing research there are going to talk about the conditions in the schools in their countries. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the policy conditions in the different countries and how they relate to each other. So I'd like to invite Federico Williams first, who comes to us from Sinivestav in Mexico City, but is Argentinian to begin with. And he's going to talk about schools in Mexico.
Thank you, Tom. Well, my name is Federico Williams. English is not my mother tongue, so sorry for that. I'm doing my PhD in Mexico. I'm originally from Argentina, as Tom said, and I want to show you some work that we've been doing in one Mexican rural school. But first, I wanted to introduce you a little to the Mexican education system. This is a survey that's been conducted in 2020. This is the percentage of population aged 3 to 29 years that is enrolled in the 2019-2020 school year. You can see here that there is almost 100%, 98.7, 95.9 of the students are enrolled. That's for basic education from 6 to 12 and 7 to 15. And there's a difference between male and female students also. You can see it over there. Another characteristic of the Mexican school system is that it's a big difference between private and public schools. Families from higher income tend to send their children to private schools, but the public system is very big, and you can see these differences between levels also. In secondary level, there is 8.6% of the students go to private, and upper secondary is higher and is much higher in higher education. In this survey, they asked about main electronic devices that were used for school activities or distance learning. So you can see here there's small use of tablets. There is 5.3% of use of digital television. This has to do with a tradition in Mexican school system that they have these schools that have no teachers, but they have TVs. They are running since 1970s, and now they are still using it, but with televisions in the houses. Well, you can see here desktop, laptops, and the main device used are smartphones. Here you can see it from different levels. In primary and secondary school, the use of smartphones is very important. And this is what we are seeing in the school that we are working now. This is Mexico. Here you can see the area, the region that we're working on. This is Mexico City. We're working in 2 schools in Mexico City and one that is in the state of Mexico. It's more than 2 hours from Mexico City. Here you can see some pictures of the school. It was founded in 1981. It's for secondary level, that is from 11 to 15 years old, approximately. 490 students, 22 teachers, a principal and a vice principal, and 2 supervisors. The school has no internet connection for imparting classes, only in the principal's office and the guidance counselor's office. And the stationery shop has its own internet connection, and they sell 1 hour of connectivity for teachers and students. The students sometimes have data on their cell phones and use it in the class. Near the water tank that you see up there's an antenna. That's one of the antennas that they have for connection. About digital infrastructure's equipment, the equipment, there is one technology classroom with 25 desktop computers, 45 laptops, and 3 charging cards. You can see it over there. And this equipment was provided by the State of Mexico in collaboration with 1 NGO and 3 private companies. About the software and platforms that is being used, the school computers have Office installed. They used to have a free version when this funding started, but now they have a pirate version. They use the main platform used is WhatsApp, Google Search, and YouTube, Google Classroom, and they use a lot video games for their cell phones. Okay, about financing and repairing, and this is something that we're thinking about lately. Parents support internet connectivity in principal's office, and they also support the repairing of students' computer. They also pay the salary of the school doorman. For example, parents tend to pay for these other services that the school gets. Teachers use their own cell phones and laptops for working. One guidance counselor brings her USB internet stick, and 2 of her partners contribute to pay for the data plan. The parents buy cell phones, pay data, and buy computer for their children. And some students that work buy their own cell phones and pay for their data. It's very common for that students works. Well, some concluding thoughts. From an historical perspective, the Mexican state has a low capacity fiscal infrastructure and a limited social provision, but an ability to appropriate society's efforts and to present outcomes as the success of the state policy. This works out cheap for the central government and the wealthy, but dear to impoverished rural and urban populations who pay a high price for very modest progress. And the state policies seems to be successful in transferring to the communities the cost of school expansion and maintenance, including the cost that makes school digitalization possible in a regressive distribution of resources that punishes the poor. So this is Mexico.
So I just want to introduce Felix Bücher, our colleague from Germany.
Yeah, thanks Tom, and hi everyone. As said, my name is Felix Bücher. I'm the PhD student from the German team based in Brunswick, Germany. And I also want to talk a little bit about how digitalization and inequalities play out in Germany, or at least in the 2 schools I'm doing my research in right now. And I want to start, as Fede did, with a little contextualization of the German school system, because the German school system has some of the inequalities that exist in the social realm kind of embedded, or they are in the structure of the school system, and this also plays out into the digitalization of school, as you will see later. So as you can see here, after primary school, so after the first 4 years of schooling, the German students kind of get sorted into different school forms or school types, dependent on their performance in primary school. So the class teacher will make a recommendation on which school type they will or they should go to, and then the parents maybe discuss and decide. So the first possibility they have is to go to secondary general school, or Hauptschule, as we call it. And this is 5 years of schooling, and it's mostly like practical education, and in the end they will get a certificate that qualifies them for like training programs that are mostly practical. So after 5 years they will leave school and do mostly practical work. Second possibility is going to the secondary school, or Realschule. And this is 1 more year of schooling, so 6 years, I guess, yes. And this is a mixture of academic training or academic education and practical education. And after 6 years, they will get another certificate that qualifies them again for practical training programs that are a little bit more into maybe trade or administrative work, so not as practical as the first possibility. And then the third one is the academic secondary school, which we call Gymnasium. And this is another 3 years, so in total 9 years of schooling. And this is mostly academic training or academic education. And it leads them to getting a certificate, which we call Abitur. And with the Abitur, they can enter university and have their academic career continued. So as you can see, this sorting is kind of very relevant for the life of the students. In a very early age, when they're 10, they get sorted. And the idea here is that dependent on their talents and their individual learning styles, they get their appropriate education. But in practice, it kind of plays out differently more often than not. For example, students from wealthy families, from higher middle class families, from academic families, from white families will go to the Gymnasium, which is more the elite school. And students from families with low income, maybe not with an academic background, often families with migration background, they will go to the secondary general school. So inequalities that exist in the society are kind of reproduced in the German schooling system, and they get reinforced in a way. And social and educational mobility is hard for students and their families. And there's another school form that is kind of emerging right now, which is the comprehensive school, or Gesamtschule, which is kind of a school for everyone. So the idea is that no matter the performance in primary school, they can all go to the Gesamtschule, and then they will leave after 9th grade, after 10th grade, after 13th grade, dependent on whatever performances they show. So they will share the classroom with all different kinds of students. And I will later in my presentation talk more about one secondary general school and one comprehensive school, one purple and green school, and see how digitalization plays out in these different school forms. And I do my research in 8th and 9th grade. And just to give you some context on where I'm doing my research, both schools are located in Hanover, which is the capital of the federal state of Lower Saxony in Germany, in the north of Germany. And what is interesting maybe is that both schools are located next to each other, so they're not far from another, but they are very different, as you can see in the next slides. So the purple school, as I said, is a secondary general school, and the green school is a comprehensive school. So what are the differences and similarities here? One obvious difference, the purple school is a very small school, so there are about 300 students here, and the green school is one of the biggest in the whole federal state, and so more than 1,300 students. The purple school has a bad reputation, so it's considered a problem school with problem kids and from problematic families, and there's a lot of bad press going on, and always conflict and so on. Maybe you know these stories from schools. And the green school has kind of a good reputation. It has like a well-known pedagogical concept, and especially when it comes to digitalization, it has a good reputation. So when it comes to the different technical devices that are in schools, in the Purple School, we have a computer lab. It kind of looks similar, this is just a small frame, but it looks similar to the one we just saw in Felix's presentation. And this is located in one classroom that is like in the faraway corridor at the school. So the students, when they have media education, which they have once a week, so they would like travel to this room, and it takes some time, and so technology in general is kind of far away. And technology is only part of this media education subject. In the Green School, on the other hand, we have tablet classes that are maybe more familiar from Swedish schools. So the students are handed out iPads when they enter the school. Everyone has an iPad. Technology is part of everyday schooling, so no matter the subject, they always use this iPad. So technology is kind of always there. And when it comes to digital infrastructures, there are also major differences here. In the Purple School, for example, there is no Wi-Fi in school. The staff room, the teachers organize their private Wi-Fi that they can use during their breaks, but for the school itself, there is no Wi-Fi. Also no learning management system. And the teachers use a digital grading program that is installed in some of the desktop PCs in the staff room, but that's kind of all there is. And in the Green School, on the other hand, and again, maybe that's more similar to the Swedish case, we have Wi-Fi, we have a learning management system that is used for communication and storing files and stuff. And the teachers also use a digital class register to observe attendance and do some grading, stuff like that. So you see there are a lot of differences when it comes to digitalization of schooling that are kind of connected to this inequality that I was starting my presentation with, the inequality that is embedded in the school system. So what does it also mean for digital technologies and inequalities? First, and this is the most obvious one, is there's a digital divide here. And it is seen in the Purple School. Some schools are equipped with digital technologies and digital infrastructures, and others are not. That means that the students who don't have access to digital technologies are maybe left behind in a digital world or a digital labor market or whatever. So there is this gap, this divide that is maybe getting bigger in German society. But, and this is just another perspective that I like to offer before I end this presentation, maybe there's another kind of inequality going on here, because in the Green School, because they are digitalized and they use iPads and they have apps like Google Classroom in their room, they're also more exposed to datafication processes. So the data of the personal and educational data of the students is collected, is stored, is maybe visible to commercial actors. Whereas the Purple School, they are kind of secure from all of this. So maybe there's another inequality going on here. And also this connects maybe to broader discussions about surveillance capitalism or data colonialism, some of the big topics that we discuss in our research community. And with this, I would like to hand back to my colleague, first Tom and then Godfrey.
Yeah, so I'd just like to introduce one of our colleagues from South Africa, Godfrey Muyambi.
Okay, greetings to you all. As introduced, I'm Godfrey Muyambi. I'm going to present to you the digitalization and inequalities in a South African context. I'll start by looking at the map of South Africa with you. Here's the map of South Africa. South Africa consists of 9 provinces, and out of those 9 provinces, our project is centered in this province, which is called Gauteng, and it comes down to this other province, which is called KwaZulu-Natal. Right, I'll move on to give you an overview of the current statistics, school statistics in 2022. There are 26,000 schools with 400,000 teachers, 13 million learners, 500 learners per school on average, and the teacher-people ratio is 33 learners to 1 teacher. And we have a problem of literacy issue where we have 80% of 10-year-olds who cannot understand what they are reading. And in the province of Limpopo, we have got 91% of the 10-year-olds in the Limpopo province who face literacy issue. 85% of the 10-year-olds in the Eastern Cape province face, again, literacy issue. And only 8% of the learners that are enrolled have English as their home language. This literacy issue is attributed to the use of English language in the classroom. Then I move on to the infrastructure. According to the 2018 statistics, there were 23,471 public schools in South Africa, out of which 86 of the schools had no laboratories. 77% had no library. 72% had no internet. And only 1% of the school had no electricity. It is also appalling to note that 85% of the students attend dysfunctional schools. Dysfunctional schools, these are schools which do not have proper sanitary conditions such as water and toiletries. Then I want to also to explain to you the use of quintiles. Our schools in South Africa are classified according to quintile levels, which range from 1 to 5. In general, South Africa has a world record of wide economic disparities. Learners in public schools experience unequal educational opportunities in terms of quality, access, and resource availability. The schools are then categorized into 5 quintile levels based on socio-economic status, average income, school geographical location, and literacy level of the community where the school is located. In that case, quintile 1 schools receive the highest funding per learner from the government, while quintile 5 schools receive the lowest funding per learner from the government. And then here I was supposed to have the quintile levels, which I'm not seeing here. Okay, thank you. Now, I was not seeing that. Now the quintile levels, here's the range of quintile levels, where quintile levels 1, 2, and 3 are non-fee paying schools. And these quintiles receive a greater portion of funding from the government. Quintile 4 and 5 are fee-paying schools, and they receive the lowest funding from the government. Let's have a pictorial view of this. Here is a pictorial view showing the allocation of funds. You can actually see from that diagram that quintile 1, 2, and 3 have got a lion's share of the funding of the government, and then followed by quintile 4 and then quintile 5. Making a comparison of the quintile 1 schools, although we might see that we have got quintile 1, but within the quintile level, there are some differences that exist. If you look at those classroom blocks, you can actually see that the other one is slightly modern and the other one is a bit old standard. Getting into detail of these comparisons, we can look at the township school and rural school school. In township schools, normally we have electricity provided, but in rural schools, sometimes we might not have electricity. Township has got Wi-Fi available, rural school does not have Wi-Fi. Township school has got smart boards, and rural school no smart boards. The use of cell phone is not allowed. That's one thing which is worrisome there at the school. While at rural school, the use of cell phone is allowed, but most of the learners do not have those cell phones. Schools in this Quintile 1, they use WhatsApp groups for online learning, both schools, but they are not provided with free data to do the online learning. So it depends whether the parents can afford to buy data for the learners. If they cannot not afford, that means they are deprived. Now let's also compare Quintile 5 schools. As I've alluded above, that the quintiles might be the same, but there are differences that exist. We have got structural differences like you can see in those two schools. The first school, which is white and black children only, it was a former white-only school, now accommodating black children because of the new era, new independence. And then the right school, which is black-only children, these are emerging black schools for those middle-class black people. You can also see that this one is Modén and the black school is still of low standard. Getting to details of comparisons of these quintile schools, we can also compare what is there and what is not there. They all have electricity available. Wi-Fi is also available to students in both schools, but in the black school, we find Wi-Fi only being availed to students doing computer and computer application as a subject. The other students are not allowed to access the Wi-Fi. Students are not allowed to use cell phones at the school, in both schools. And we also have a situation where both schools, learners have got cell phones. The learning management system we see here is now a bit advanced. It's not only centered on WhatsApp. Now we have got a D6 application connect used for online learning. Again, both schools do not provide free data for the learners. What is worrisome at the black school only is that the school is labeled an ICT center, but not all students access computers and Wi-Fi. Let's compare the structural difference in terms of computers in the Quintile 1 and Quintile 5 labs. You can see that blue Quintile 1 lab, the computers are of low quality, old-fashioned, but in the Quintile 5 lab, there are modern computers that exist there. Right. What can we say about the South African situation? We can say now, in the South African situation, there are a lot of disparities, there are a lot of inequalities that exist. Structural disparities and infrastructural disparities do exist in the South African situation. In terms of buildings, in terms of quality of digital resources, in terms of selective accessibility as shown in the emerging black schools where only students who do computers are allowed to access Wi-Fi. There is also a problem of provision of data for online learning, and this is only a tip of the iceberg in the South African situation. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'd like to welcome the last of the country presentations now, our colleague Marie Utterberg Modén. who's going to bring it home and talk about the Swedish situation.
Okay, say something about Sweden as well. In Sweden, equality in education is understood as providing similar educational opportunity to all, regardless of disabilities, gender, family background, or socioeconomic status. And inequality in Swedish terms is likvärdighet. This means that all students have the right to a high quality education, and that we consider that students have different needs. And this means also that schools should compensate for those different needs that students have. In our national digital strategy, it's also talk about equality. It says, it's my translation, but it says that Swedish schools should be leaders in using the possibility of digitalization in the best way to achieve a high level of digital competence among children and students in order to promote knowledge development and equality. So this means that school leaders should have the knowledge to lead the process of digitalization in schools. That teachers should be able to select appropriate digital resources and know how to use them to improve education for all students, and that students should be given the opportunity to become competent citizens and employees in a digitalized society. In Sweden, when we talk about inequality or equality, the debate often starts in analysis of outputs, and if we have inequality or not, and then how this then we need to change the conditions. So this is from an inquiry from 2020, and so in Sweden we can talk about the individual student, both the student's background, but also the students could have different needs. For example, the student could have dyslexia or other things that have to be considered during instructions. So we look at individual conditions on each student, and we also look at the individual schools, how are the local society, the quality of the schools, and so we have both the individual students' conditions and structural conditions from schools. And then we often talk about then is the process to increase inequality, and how that can be done then through teaching, school leadership, or management. And in another inquiry from 2019, they look at inequality in Swedish schools, and they state that during the 2000s, the differences between schools in terms of students' results increased. Students have become increasingly divided between different schools based on socioeconomic and migration backgrounds. And student background is becoming a factor concerning knowledge outcomes. And that the correlation between students' conditions and the quality of the school they attend is generally weak. And I mean, this is a debate that is ongoing in Sweden, so I think this is nothing new for you. If we then look at inequality in relation to digitalization in the schools in Sweden, generally we had a good access to computers and tablets, but not for all, as also Thomas said before. Most teachers use digital tools to adapt teaching to their students, but teachers said that they not always have access to the tools they need. That many have problems with buying computers and internet connections and so on. They also found that the access to IT support has increased, so it has gotten better and better. When we have looked at schools in Sweden, some schools, it's something that we have found across the schools. And this is when we talked about students' backgrounds and their parents, and the parents' access and ability to access all these platforms that they now are supposed to do. For example, they are maybe supposed to go into some attendance system for their children when they are sick or something, or to before this utvecklingssamtal. They have to go to a platform and so on. And what we have seen in those schools we have visited is that the school leaders are aware of that there is some difficulties. For example, one school leader said that it is a process to find the right way to educate teachers in these platforms. It's not evident that all parents can do that. Also, when we talk to a special needs teacher, as one said, there I think we are losing some parents. The special needs teacher, they meet those students with where parents have problems to access those platforms. When we talk to the teachers, those who we talked to wasn't really aware of that it could be a problem for the parents. And also the IT administration believe that it's almost very easy. So we saw that there are different perspectives here in relation to your tasks or what you have to do in schools. And I want to end with saying that in Sweden, equality have a close connection to democracy. So it's very important that, of course, that we have an equity school. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Marie. And so, to round things off, I'd like to invite our colleague Svea Kiesewetter, who will talk about the policy situation around digital schooling in these different countries and how they relate.
All right, let's see. Yeah, this is on. All right. Yeah, as Tom said, I'm going to switch the focus a little bit, and we heard quite a bit about the local contexts, and also Marie touched a little bit upon the policy situation. And I'm actually from the Swedish team, but I also just want to say that I'm representing the work of many more people. Some of them are here, but not all of them. So I just wanted to let you know that. So, as I said, the following part is going to give you a little bit of insight into the findings that we had from our policy analysis. And as we have seen, and also during this day probably heard and also know, digitalization, digital tools, platforms are becoming more and more part of everyday school life, and also in many different countries. And overall, we can see that this is a general shift that has been set into motion by a variety of national and international actors, and also policy actors that target digitalization. And overall, we can see that there exist high hopes when it comes to digitalization, such as possible opportunities changing inequality thanks to increased access to digital tools and infrastructures. But at the same time, there are also critical voices that have highlighted concerns, specifically around inequalities that might increase due to digital technologies. And this potential tension, I should switch, there it is. And this potential tension between opportunities and reconfigurations of inequalities, this is kind of our starting point that we have had for our policy analysis. And here we also contribute with a more multi-voiced perspective and local accounts. So based on this argumentation, our guiding research question was, how are social digital inequalities represented in education policy around the world? And what have we actually done? Well, we had some extensive data collection in the different local contexts. So we searched official websites, we did online exploration using search engines, we did snowballing, but we also did interviews with key informants to get to know which ones are the most important policy documents, and we also requested documents from municipalities. And to just give you an idea how many documents we actually collected, and here you can see some examples from the different local contexts, but overall, we have a repository of over 1,000 policy documents. Of course, we did not analyze all of them in detail, but we have chosen the key documents in the local context, and we carefully read the selected documents to specifically look at inequality. And I also want to mention that it is quite a challenge to have that many different researchers working in one project, that many different local contexts, to just balance and to give everyone the same attention and the voice. And we try to do that in this presentation as well. So, the first thing we identified in our policy analysis was that there's a general idea of the digital as being something inherently positive. So while there are overall challenges that come with the digitalization of education, we could see that in all different local contexts there was a general agreement, or that there was a general agreement within the idea that digital education is something good and that it equips students with fundamental tools to thrive in the future. And also the future is seen and understood and imagined as something digital, a digital future, as we can see in these examples here. In this understanding, as I said, the digital is seen as something good. Digital education seems to be able to address various inequalities as well. But a closer look into the document shows different ways in which inequalities are problematized, and also different suggestions on how these inequalities should be addressed. And here we can contrast the so-called Global South with the so-called Global North. Whereas policy from the Global South problematize inequalities on a structural and systematic level, policies from the Global North problematize individual differences of students instead, as we can see here, for example. Yes. In this sense, we can find inequalities connected to race, ethnicity, poverty, gender, ability, or urban-rural differences in the Global South. Here, technology is imagined as a way to address and tackle these inequalities, as shown in these examples. As a contrast, policies from the Global North problematize students as highly individual beings with individual needs when it comes to learning and also education. So overall, students are seen as different from one another, but not in terms of having systematic disadvantages or advantages, but just that they are different from one another. But yet again, technology is here seen or is imagined as something that can address the individuality of the students, and provide solutions for their individual learning, as shown in these examples. Needless to say that even though we did not find systematic inequalities in policy documents from the global north, they still do exist outside of these policies. And here we can see some of these so-called silences and policy documents. We have seen how, no matter if policy documents present systematic inequalities, they overall assume that the student is just being different from one another. Overall, technology is seen as providing the solution. But so far, I have presented those kinds of inequalities and differences that have existed independently from digital technologies. For example, gender inequalities, poverty, or individual differences have been found for a really long time, even before we had digital platforms or smart boards in schools. So for the next part of this presentation, I just wanted to switch the focus to those kinds of inequalities that we in the analysis of the policy documents consider to be inherently digital. So, whereas in Argentinian and Mexican policy documents, there's the view of having a disadvantaged position when it comes to global digital inequalities, the access to technologies is seen as a possibility to catch up with the digital world, as you can see here in this quote. Similarly, Botswana policy documents state a disadvantaged position, while seeing a digitalized education system as the opportunity to be at par with the rest of the world. Although in German policy documents one seems to have an advantaged position, and one might think so as well, there's still a concern about potentially losing a connection with the digitalized rest of the world, something that we have called here the fear of falling behind. In contrast, the Swedish policy documents, and this is something that Marie has touched upon, does not problematize potential disadvantages in the global digital inequalities at all. Instead, a lot has been talked about sustaining its position as a world leader, to continue being a world leader when it comes to digitalization and the world. And it's very forward-looking, as you can see in the quote here. I think there's a slide missing, so I will just summarize. The last slide was about the South African policy document that take a more introspective stance when it comes to global digital inequalities. And their technology is seen as a way to transit South African education into the fourth industrial revolution, and also past apartheid inequalities that are primarily connected with digital inequalities as means for repair, restitution, and healing. But to wrap up the presentation, we presented our findings or I presented it for all of us, the findings of our policy analysis from 6 different research contexts. And overall, we outlined different approaches to systematic inequalities and individual differences. However, in both cases, digital technologies are imagined as means to address inequalities, differences, and digital divides in various ways. So what we can see is that there's a general view of techno-solutionism when it comes to inequalities. However, we would also like to add that the separation that we have made between these more traditional systematic inequalities from these newer, what we consider inherently digital inequalities, is also problematic. Our analysis has shown that digital education policy documents from around the world and from different contexts do not share this understanding of an inherently socio-digital nature of inequalities when it comes to digital education, digital technologies in schools. A silence in digital education that we have to be aware of, and we should also provide more analysis for in the future.